Hey, everybody. It's episode 1 of the Back to School mini-series for UIO, the podcast for teen girls. Hugs to everyone, even if they are virtual. And thank you for joining UIO, the podcast for teen girls. It is for you and about you inside out. I am Sonja Lewis, your host. Today, we're talking about the long-awaited return to school. Wherever you are in the world, you've likely had your school career interrupted by the global pandemic and spent several months in lockdown. And though many restrictions have been lifted and some freedoms have been regained, we are still learning how to navigate this space. We face so much uncertainty about how safe it is to resume some sense of normality, given there is not likely to be a vaccine for a while yet, and in some instances, infection rates are rising. There are just so many questions that we still have to deal with. What measures are being taken to ensure that our students, teachers, and anyone who works with schools, families, as safe as possible? What does this look like? What will it feel like to students, to parents, to teachers? Answers to these questions mean different things to different countries. All the same, everyone wants the same result. We want safety. To ensure that this podcast has as wide appeal as possible, I'm so excited to welcome a panel of 5 guests from both the UK and the US to help us prepare to navigate this unknown space. First, we have Sue Atkins, our parenting expert who provides children, teenagers, and parents with the resources needed to nurture happy and healthy young people through her webinars, support programs, podcasts, and appearances on many popular television programs. Also, she has 2 children of her own, expected to return to school this term. Welcome, Sue.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
And our next guest is Carmen Lee from London, whose work takes her into schools to help children and young people who have different emotional and social issues or learning difficulties through the use of psychological theories so that she can promote their emotional and social well-being. Carmen is about to start her 2nd year of training as an educational psychologist. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this discussion as well.
With us today, we have Sakiya Ji, also residing in the UK. She's a student environmentalist. She's founder of Swap It Up, the climate action initiative for teens by teen. Sakiya is currently raising awareness about the small things that teens can do to live a more sustainable life. Welcome, Sakiya.
Hi, Sonja. Thank you for having me too. I'm also really looking forward to this discussion.
And formerly, we had an opportunity to talk to Olivia Clark-Dixon a bit earlier because she's actually back in school. And Olivia is our US student who's going into the 11th grade and is excited to be taking AP Environmental Science and Epidemiology this term. Had no idea COVID was going to come about. She'd already signed up for it, but she's very, very excited about that. And also we will have the opportunity to talk to Nikki Gordon, who is an instructional technology specialist for the Doherty County School System in Albany, Georgia, USA. Her primary job function is to assist teachers with the integration of technology into their instruction. Her job at this time is especially critical due to the fact that her school district has gone 100% virtual and teachers are delivering instruction online. So it's going to be a great podcast, ladies. I'm so excited to have you all gathered here, even though it is virtually. And it's something that we've all gotten used to, I'm sure, nowadays. I think it's going to be a great podcast and I'm really looking forward to it. So let's jump in it. Let's start with what it looks and feels like to return to school, and both countries represent it. I know that in the United States, as I mentioned in the introduction, that at least in the district that Nikki's working in, that the schools, it's all virtual right now. But I want to jump here to the UK and talk to you a little bit about this, Carmen. Please explain what provisions are being put in place to ensure it's a safe and COVID secure environment here in the UK. What's going on? What does it look like to return to school in the UK?
I think, first of all, it's important to realise that every school takes quite a different approach because the government's giving us guidelines, but it's changing constantly. So schools have to act quite quickly. And it's based on the head teacher's choice to choose how they want to implement these guidelines. So it really varies from school to school. But I'd say in terms of physical provisions, I've seen some schools implementing the use of face masks in corridors or shared spaces, and getting teachers to wear visors, and depending on primary, secondary, getting them to be in specific bubbles. So for secondary, there might be a bubble within the year group, and then they stay within the classrooms, and then the teachers come to them. And then in primary, I think the kids tend to stay within their classes. So yeah, it really is different depending on each school and the phase that they're in. And in terms of the, I guess, emotional provision, I hope that, the teachers are trying to foster reconnection and to rebuild that relationship with the young people, and to try and promote a sense of belonging for these children. And I hope that they will provide the spaces for the students to talk about bereavement and just their experiences of lockdown, really.
I think that's really key. Nikki, return to school in the U.S. is varied from state to state and district to district. I know you're speaking to us from Doherty County in Georgia. What measures are being put in place to ensure it is safe and a COVID-secure environment?
Well, starting off every morning when each employee enters the building, they have to have their temperature checked. And if anyone's temperature is above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then they are asked to go home for a number of days. It depends upon if they have COVID symptoms. If they do not have COVID symptoms, then of course they're not required to have a test. But if they do have COVID symptoms beyond the 100 degrees, then they are asked to have a note from a doctor and a negative COVID, test result before they can return to the building. This is like the first measure. And then if you are inside the building and you start feeling ill, then they're going to sanitize your space and ask you to go home. And the same thing if you are exposed to someone that has received a positive test, then of course you will be asked to go home and quarantine and follow the same protocol. If you have symptoms, then you need to get a test, and you can't return to work until you have a negative test. But if you are exposed to someone that has a positive COVID test and you do not have any symptoms, then you are still asked to go home and quarantine.
But your teachers, this is the teachers and the administrators who are in the building. The students are actually virtual, right?
Right. The students are virtual, but the district is allowing for the children of employees to come to work with them. For instance, my colleague, she has 2 little girls, they're elementary age, and they're in her office with her. If they come outside of the office, then of course, all of us, including the children, we have to have masks. We have to, do the social distancing. We have to do the 6 feet apart from each other. They also have signs up all over to remind you to wash your hands, the correct way to wash your hands. They have sanitation stations where they have sanitizer. And definitely we have all of those things in the restroom, of course. But they tell us to avoid congregating. So anytime that we have a meeting, it's virtual, even though, your office is 8 feet away from you.
Okay. Let's ask you, Sue, as a parent and parenting expert about these provisions. Do you feel, even though it's different, and it's hard to say that one big thing is happening, but we know the government regulations. So do you feel that these provisions are enough? And if not, where do you think that they might be able to go further?
Well, as you know, I'm a former deputy head and class teacher for over 22 years. So I still have a lot of friends who are educationalists, who are still teachers. I'm a very avid follower on all sorts of activities with education on Twitter, because I'm part of different groups. And you can see that there is so much hard work going into preparing children and preparing the school environment for children returning. Obviously, I used to teach younger children, and my friends who are still teaching say that it is, now we know that perhaps the children are safer from receiving COVID. We're still not quite sure about giving COVID to other people, but they wash their hands copiously. They're not allowed to share colouring pencils. Yes, it will need, the younger the child, it will need a lot of reinforcing to remind them to step back, because naturally you want to hug, and you talk about creating a community and a sense of belonging. Absolutely true. But I think my experience, I used to be head of personal, social and health education as well in my school for many years. It is absolutely primate. Everyone's thinking about their well-being and the child's mental health. And I write copiously about this on the parenting side. I've got an article on my blog around listening. To help children heal, we need to listen to their concerns, not poo-hoo them or just push them away. Some of them will be tiny little worries. Some of them will be big worries. As you grow and mature, you can take more responsibility for yourself. So it's about looking at ways that you can empower yourself within the school environment as you grow older, so that you feel more in control, and that therefore then you don't feel quite so anxious. With younger children, I feel they take their lead from the teachers, from their parents. So if you are confident, if you are upbeat and not happy clappy, but if you're certainly sincere and you feel confident they're going back, then of course the child can relax because they take their lead from the adults surrounding them. I also think there's been some U-turns about masks and things like that for secondary school kids. So yeah, all of these precautions, they are a little bit different in each borough or each country. But I do think that everyone has the child's mental health and well-being, as well as their physical well-being, at the core of everything that they do.
That's really important. And I do want to talk about masks, and I do want to talk about social distancing. I want to get Sakiya in here and hear from her as a student who is going back to school and who's hearing all of this and who's getting ready and making your preparations. Tell us a little bit about it. When are you going back, and how are you feeling about this?
So I'm going back 2 days from recording this, and I am feeling a little bit nervous from the point of view of, over the lockdown period, I have been self-isolating, which meant I got to see a bit of my grandparents. But then going back to school means that will no longer be possible, which will be quite disheartening. But we're still going to try and socially distance see them. But in terms of going back and getting back into a school routine, I'm quite looking forward to it, because I've actually struggled not having that sort of routine and schedule in place, being at home and everything being in the same environment, with that being sleeping, eating and working. And so by having that separation, by going back to school and being around my classmates again, will help my mental state understand the difference between work and relaxation. And I think that's going to help me be a lot more productive than I have been over the sort of homeschooling experience that we had before the summer holidays.
And you're feeling safe?
I'm really happy about the fact that the masks have had that U-turn, so that's now possible to be worn, because beforehand my school was really discouraging wearing masks, which I was not at all happy about. But now we've got to the point where we are even allowed to wear them in classrooms. So I am looking forward to that. And from an environmental point of view, I'm happy that they are letting us use reusable masks, whereas they have previously said about only using disposable medical masks, which from also a financial point of view, from having to buy so many of those to go into school every day, would be quite a stress. But to be able to use a reusable mask, I'm just really happy that we're able to use that now.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that wearing masks and social distancing, to me, to my ears, they seem pretty straightforward. They seem important. So Olivia, your schooling experience will be totally different from what is happening in other parts of the United States, and possibly even in other parts of Maryland where you go to school. But tell us about the measures being put in place there and what you're expecting in terms of going back to school.
For my school right now, we're going all virtual for I think like the first semester or two. So that's pretty much the plan, and we're going to have like Zoom calls with our teachers from 8 to 12:30, and then the rest of the day I guess you just do your homework. They did a good job last year too with doing virtual in helping us like get acquainted with being at home all the time.
But how are you feeling about returning to school right now?
I'm feeling a little optimistic, I guess, because I think it will be manageable. With some of the teachers have emailed us and gone over some of the plans of what to do and set up little website hubs for the class, and they seem pretty well thought out. So on that sense, I'm feeling okay. I know it's hard socially too, because I haven't really seen my friends in like 4 months maybe. So that's kind of, hard to deal with. But overall, I'm pretty good about this.
Okay. And I'd love to hear from both you, Sue, and Carmen, and your perspectives. And how do you feel about, these two regulations, which I don't understand why they're controversial to some, but they are.
I know. I have a friend who seems to be going, well, he's not a friend now. I haven't seen him for many, many years. In fact, you suddenly realise, I don't think he is a friend. He is doing all this conspiracy theory and why am I wearing a mask and it's all a hoax and all this stuff. And you're just going, mate, 45,000 people have died in the UK. Get a grip. So for me, it's all about just doing some very simple things. Wash your hands, wear a mask and social distance. And just be mindful that you may be carrying something that you don't even know you are carrying. And you don't want to be giving it to grandparents or, anybody else. So for me, it's quite simple. And that's where it's become a little bit difficult in terms of all the different regions or the different governments, like in Wales or in Scotland or in England, slightly different stuff. Because I think if we just stuck to maybe just a few simple rules that everybody kind of stuck with, then they'd kind of conform and understand the importance of it. Because it does get very confusing where you can't, somebody said, my child's in a bubble of 55 children at school now. Does that mean 55 kids can come to her birthday party? Or not? So it can get quite confusing. So I think keep it simple, be mindful of somebody else, and then just, common sense kicks in, I hope, for some people.
Yes. Let's hear from Carmen.
Yeah, so it really does blow my mind where I hear that, people have different views towards wearing the mask because, I grew up in Hong Kong. So, back when we had the SARS pandemic, wearing a mask was just the norm and no one really had an issue with it. So it really blows my mind how there's different viewpoints. And I think, there's so many differences in people's viewpoints towards wearing the mask that we have to be really careful, because when we speak about this to the young people, I think it could be quite conflicting for them, because they'll now go into school and hear their friends' views and there might be a conflict, and that could be quite stressful for them. And I think, like Sakiya, when you mentioned earlier, you felt quite happy that, we're allowed to wear a mask again in schools. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that makes you feel more secure. And I think it's based on one of quite a popular motivational theory by Maslow, which suggests that when children actually feel and experience a sense of security, they're much more likely to achieve their full potential. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind and we try to do things that make the young people feel more reassured.
It's really, really important to just have a consistent message that is a clear and consistent message. And I understand that is quite difficult to do when there's so many different school districts. Talk to us a little bit more about how you feel about wearing a mask, Olivia.
Yeah, I think people should be wearing their masks and social distancing, because it really doesn't hurt you at all to wear the mask. I don't really get why you shouldn't wear it. And also, some people, they think that if you wear the mask, you can be within 6 feet of each other, which I don't think that's the case. You're still supposed to be distanced and wearing the mask. So I think when people don't wear it, they're just thinking only of themselves and not of other people and how it would affect others, which is sad that people wouldn't care about, the health of other people. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. And even when you see on social media, there's a lot of young influencers and they're just out every day, not social distancing. And so for young audiences, we all see that, and it's not really a great way to use your platform, I don't think.
That's a really good point. And towards the end, well, I'm going to be asking you about some of the challenges with dealing with so much change, and you'll get an opportunity to tell us, what do you think? So, Nikki, tell me, how do you think these measures will make a difference to safety, given that you are dealing with virtual schooling, even though you have the administrators and teachers back at school? And are you concerned about the psychological impact that it might have on the students or the people who are doing it?
Well, I know for sure in our office area, we consider ourselves to be a second family. So, of course, with your second family, you love to talk to them and have that social interaction. That just helps the day go by faster. But again, we are here together, but we're not here together because common meetings, common meeting places, we can't do the things that we used to do. And everybody understands because at the end of the day, it is about our safety. And one of the things that I feel that's most important is that you understand that when you're wearing the mask, it's not a protection of you, it's you protecting others.
Yeah, my mask protects you, your mask protects me. Yes.
And it's me. I'm absolutely in support of wearing a mask and practicing social distancing.
That's really important. I think that it's so key to have these measures and to implement them. And so it sounds really good that the school district is actually implementing these measures. Let's talk about safety sort of in the virtual sense, or let's just say the emotional sense. We often think of safety in the physical sense, and this is an issue as we prepare to go back to school. But many people have gone back to school in different countries, and right now they're just still doing it, trying to do the whole thing sort of virtually. And depending on what happens in this country, we might find ourselves in a situation where there's part of that, happening as well. So, for example, there have been situations in the United States where cases have been reported in the US of hacking into virtual classrooms and being disruptive and disrespectful. And sadly, that's been from some of the students' standpoint. But what I really want to talk to you about is there's the emotional burden of trying to learn. And I think the reason that I want to bring the word emotional into this is because even if you're sitting in a classroom with a mask on and your desk is a further distance apart from the student next to you than it used to be, it's in your head now. I'm here in the space. So I want to start off with talking to you, Sue, about the emotional burden for students and parents associated.
Interesting, isn't it? I think that's why I come back to, if you can take responsibility for your bit of it, knowing that if you want to wear a mask, you feel safe wearing it, you feel that you're a certain distance away from your friend and your colleague, you know that they have similar values to you around some of these things, then that can help you feel relaxed and then ready to learn. Because before, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as you were saying, is core, that you have to have the basics before you can go on the next layer of learning. I think it's important also that young people don't get too sucked into the drama of somebody over here saying all sorts of stuff, somebody else being belligerent or somebody else not being respectful. I think the key energy here is be kind, and kindness and patience and respecting each other. So, for example, I was talking to my aunt today. I took her to the dentist. She's 84, and we're trying to work out how to get her there safely, etc. I'm always taking my lead from my other friend or my other person that I'm with, where they feel comfortable. I do what I do, which I feel comfortable with, protecting myself with mask, washing my hands, putting on disinfectant, etc. And it's the same thing in school. I think if the culture is one of kindness, compassion, and caring, then everyone can feel that they are respected, they feel safe. And I think it's also, you've got young people as well as anybody, you can get wound up by other people's going on about something. I remember when I was at school, somebody said, I haven't done any revision. I haven't done anything. I don't know what I'm going to do for my exam. And they've been up all night studying like crazy, and they wind me up, who was nervous as it was. So you have to learn to tune that stuff out. You have to let it go over your head like the red arrows or an aeroplane just flying over you. So it washes over you. You have to kind of press your pause button, take a deep breath, step back and go, you know, that's their stuff, actually. That's not my stuff. And you've got to try and not water the weeds of worry. You need to try and water the flowers of hope and positivity so that they will blossom and bloom. And this will become your new normal. You will learn to adapt to this. We are amazingly resilient as human beings. And I've just written a new ebook about resilience. And I call them the nice, you know, the 9 keys, the C, or they're all begin with a C. But the thing is here is to empower yourself, to be respectful, do what you can, and then you can go on to start learning. Because let's face it, it's the basics, isn't it? To keep safe, to feel, you know, keep well, and then you go on to do geography or maths or science or English or whatever you're doing. So keep that bigger picture and do your best. And then I think people will feel safe. We'll adapt to it, and we will get through this. We are very resilient as human beings.
Yeah, it's quite something. Let's hear from Sakiya on this. You've got to stay safe. You have to keep track of your studies, and so much is going on, and you still have your friends. And so talk to us a little bit about how you're feeling or how you think it's going to be from an emotional perspective from you, trying to keep that balance.
Well, around sort of school anyway, because I'm going into my final year of sixth form, so I'm going to be doing my exams at the end, doing my A-levels. And so there's already the stress around exams and stress around making sure I'm doing enough studying and making sure I'm on top of all of my work and everything that I was feeling before the pandemic, even last year. And then to have on top of it the added stress of making sure you're doing the right thing in terms of being safe from the pandemic, making sure that you are socially distancing from people and making sure that you are in the right sort of zones around school, because of course it's being bubbled into different zones, and to just make sure you're aware of all the rules and so that you don't get called out on anything, because there's quite a lot going on all at once, and it's just quite a lot to process in your mind all at once, because it has to be sort of subconscious, and hopefully it will eventually become just second nature and we'll understand what to do. But the problem that I am kind of seeing that could happen is that the government keep giving different guidelines, and so the schools are going to keep changing what they're doing. And so that constant change and not knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, because it could change one week from what it was last week, it provides some sort of uncertainty, which isn't good for our sort of mental state. Like how there was sort of this uncertainty sort of during lockdown when we didn't know when we were going back to school. We now know that we're going back this week, but beforehand there was like no certainty as to when this lockdown was going to end. And so it was just stressful in that sort of mindset as well, because we didn't know when we were going to return back to normality. And so by going back to school and not having a sense of certainty as to it's going to stay week upon week exactly the same, and you could build into a rhythm, I think it's going to be quite hard. But hopefully it does sort of have some sense of normality, not maybe the old normal, but a new normal, and hopefully it does remain quite consistent.
Yes. And let's ask you, Carmen, as well, bringing in teachers into it. Have you had any feedback? And I know, so you had your friends who are still working within the schools as well, from teachers about the pressure and what they're feeling about this return back to school.
I think it's actually quite difficult for teachers to be back. I think most of them are back today with lots of staff training and just getting used to the new normal for them as well, because as much as it's difficult for students to try to adjust to everything, I think the teachers have a lot of pressure to try to implement the consistency, because I suppose a lot of the time it's not that they don't want to implement the consistency, but it's just ever changing, like we were mentioning earlier. And especially when a lot of people who work in offices still seem to be working from home, and teachers are expected to go in to support these young people, and they might have their own difficulties, and they might have experienced their own bereavement or their difficulties during lockdown. So yeah, I think it is quite a difficult time for teachers as well. Well, I hope that the senior management within schools will really support their staff and just to allow them to share their experiences of lockdown, and to make sure that they are heard, and hopefully schools have a well-being policy so then the staff can be supported as well, not just the students. And I suppose I've got some friends that are starting their teacher training this week, and I think it's really important to reassure them as well that this is just a temporary normal. But
we hope so.
Yeah, I hope so.
Nikki, let's talk about technology. You are our technology specialist. Talk to us about what can be done to ensure children's safety while in a virtual classroom.
Well, some of the things that you can do is, of course, create as much as possible, a Google Meet link that is not shared. We use Google Meet for our virtual sessions with our students. And one of the things that teachers have been doing is creating a unique Google Meet link for each day's class. So it's very hard for a random student. It's even harder for someone outside of our district because the way that it is set up, you have to have Dougherty County school system credentials to even enter the meeting. So you're already exposed if you are here and you're not supposed to be here. The teacher will notice that, record your information, and turn it in, to technology and the school principals, school administrators. And that way they can go ahead and reprimand you. Because I think the first week of high school, we had a lot of students that were just randomly showing up in classes. But this has really helped. Number one, having the district only credentials to be able to get inside of the Google Meet link, and then also changing that Google Meet link every day. It's not that hard to do. So it's not, I don't think teachers are aggravated, they're bothered by it at all, because when someone comes and disrupts your class, it's disturbing to the students, but it's also disturbing to the teachers. So I think they feel very good about, just simply changing their code every day, which will make it harder for random students to join the class.
That's really important to have that consistency, because you have to have a classroom environment, a learning environment. Even though it's virtual, the key, I think, is you still have to have the attitude that you're in school. But let's talk about students a little bit here, because you're however old you are and it's a little bit difficult for you. What sort of advice can we give them? I myself would say to anybody who's working remotely or studying remotely, it is so important to create an atmosphere. But one of the things that I want to throw at you is that not everybody has a different room other than their bedroom. And they share the room with another person who's also trying to learn virtually. So what can we do to create this learning atmosphere so that the students too can come with the right, just as they would come to school to learn? We're not talking about the anomaly who didn't come to school to learn. We're talking about somebody who really wants to come to school to learn. What would you say to the students?
I would say to them, even if you are in the same room, find your corner, stay in your corner and have your headphones on, have a headset on so that you hear your teacher. And the same thing for the other person that is sharing the common area with you. Create a little nook for yourself where you have your laptop, you have your supplies, but definitely try to have on a headset. And our district actually passed those out. This way you can create your own space, even though we're sharing a space.
I just want to bring Sakiya in and just talk a little bit about when school was disrupted, how that felt, and how this has impacted you emotionally. And perhaps what do you feel that you have done sort of to mitigate that sort of return to school? You talked about it earlier. Things happen very quickly, and now it's time to go back.
Yeah, so again, everything kind of happened very quickly going into lockdown in terms of not knowing when it was going to exactly happen. And then it sounded like it wasn't going to happen, but then we're seeing other countries closing all of their schools. And then we were like, it's going to happen eventually, it's inevitable. But it was again that uncertainty of going, I don't know when the school is going to be closed. I know it's going to close at some point. And then suddenly the government were like, right, it's Wednesday, Friday, school's going to be closed. And that was kind of it. And I was quite lucky that my school had a plan in place. And from being in an exam year group, I had quite a bit of support from the teachers online, whereas I know that the non-exam year groups weren't getting that same support because the teachers were trying to focus mainly on exam students. And at the beginning, I got really into it and I was fine working from home, and it was just quite nice actually to be able to just spend a lot of time in one place and not have to get up and move and disrupt my learning. And I could work on something until the end of an exercise instead of stopping halfway through because the lesson is over. When it got to sort of the Easter holidays, I had then not done much work over that period. And so getting back into the swing of working again from being in my room and being in my house and just staying in that same environment, that's kind of when I started to get into that point of it being a bit more difficult to catch up with my schoolwork. But then I found it very useful again when the sort of last month just before it was summer holidays, our school opened, so we went in for 1 day a week, and they had it sort of on a rotation of how many students were in, and it was just again for year 10 and year 12 so that we could make sure our exam sort of syllabus was covered. But it was quite nice to again have that exposure to teachers and to be able to ask questions face to face, because I think one of the difficulties, and I spoke to my friends about this as well, is that there were these forums online where we could raise questions, but a lot of the time you don't want to because you feel like you're the only one asking for it and you don't want to be judged by other students about a question that you want to ask. But the likelihood is a lot of other students are feeling the exact same way, but it's still, you can't help but thinking everyone's going to judge me for asking this. And you can't quite message your teachers individually in quite the same way. It was possible, but it was more on sort of a rotation between the teachers for a specific department. And I know different schools handled it differently, but from my sort of school experience, that was something that me and my friends did sort of say to each other, that we felt nervous. And so we would talk to each other about it, and we would talk to sort of our classmates about it and try and figure out the answer from there. But it was fairly difficult to go and actually ask on a large forum with about 400 people in it a question to something.
It's quite different from being in school.
Yeah, from going from like a classroom of maybe 20 people where only 20 people could really judge you for putting up your hand
to 400. That would have definitely had a major emotional.
I mean, it did depend
sort of
on the subject, because some subjects obviously have smaller numbers of students taking them, because I'm doing my A-level. So, for example, when my geography, I only have about 50 people would be on that forum.
Oh, okay. But it's a really good place to come to, because it sort of raises what Sakiya was saying. She talked a little bit about virtual versus face-to-face, sort of looking at the advantages or the disadvantages. And I'd love to hear from each of you. Let's start with Carmen on that, on what do you think or some of the advantages of, or sort of one versus the other?
So I think one of the major advantages is the convenience that it has been able to give people, to both the staff and the students, because I think quite a lot of people were now, they did benefit from shorter traveling times and just about finding that balance. So by saving time on traveling, you've now got more time to work, practice your hobbies or spend more time with the people that you love. And it's really nice to be able to spend more time with people that you might not necessarily see. Parents might normally be at work, so it's really nice to be able to spend more time with the people within the family. But I do think by not going into schools and not having that direct contact, children are really missing out on that socializing aspect. I suppose in terms of more cons for the virtual learning, I think another con with virtual learning is that there might be a lot of cyberbullying that's taking place. And it's quite hard for teachers and staff to try to control that. So I think it could be a potentially quite damaging place that we need to watch out for.
Yes, and that's something that Nikki's going to talk to us about.
I also agree the cyberbullying, it's an issue, especially with the older students, the high school level students. A lot of times they're just coming to interrupt the teacher's lesson or even the flow of things. So some of the things that we've done in our district to combat that is to suggest to teachers to meet virtually with our students. Some of the things that you can do is restrict it to the district email address. You can restrict it to that so that it's not an anonymous person coming inside the meeting, even though you can't control them coming or not. And then something else that we've instructed teachers to do to try to limit the amount of what we call just the pop-ins to come in bullying. One thing that we've tried to do is to instruct the teachers to give a different Google Meet link every day.
Okay.
So that if you are passing this to someone, you don't know the Google Meet link until it's time for you to come to class. So you don't have time to give someone else the Meet link. We've noticed is that the traffic has really slowed down a lot because once the students realize that, okay, we see your name, we see your email address, and you can be reprimanded right away, it's really slowed down on the amount of pop-ups and random students showing up inside the meeting, and definitely it's gotten rid of anyone outside of the district logging into the class.
Yeah, I think that's really key. It goes back to the word balance. We're going to have to wrap up really soon, but what I want to do is get some jewels of wisdom from everybody on the panel. We'll start with Sue on
Ooh. No pressure.
no pressure, Sue, whatsoever. You've got lots of wonderful things to tell us. We talked about so much in terms of staying safe from the perspective of the students, the teachers themselves, the administrators, and we've talked about from a parental expert. But what can parents do, Sue? Tell us a little bit about, give us some tips on how parents might feel a little bit good about getting that balance and having their children go back to school.
Yes, well, I think you need to get grounded, you need to get centered, you need to get positive, you need to get relaxed, you need to breathe deeply, you need to go within yourself. You know that you're resilient, you know that you're capable, you know that you're competent. Think of a time in the past when you have been capable and competent in difficult situations. You used your sort of resourcefulness. Tap into that, because then that's whether you're a student or whether you're a parent, because actually young people and younger children will take their lead from their parents and their teachers. As I said before, if you're calm and you're collected and you're oozing kind of confidence around what's happening around you, then young people and kids take their lead from you. You give them that safety, you give them that stability. And although we have to learn to bend, not break when we're in a storm, it's, we are still in the storm. We can bend, we can adapt, we can be flexible, and we will get through this. So look after your self-care. So make sure that you look after your own mental health. No one can necessarily do it for you. You know when you might be getting anxious. What could you do? Could you go and find someone to have a chat with that you trust, like I said, an older family member or someone at school to reassure you? So tap into your own self-care and look after yourself and your mental health, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, your well-being. So try and keep that bigger picture whilst you're doing small steps towards the big things as well. So I hope that helps.
Amazing. Carmen, Nikki, what would you sort of words of wisdom or advice would you have for both students and teachers? Anything to add to what Sue said?
I think linking on to what Sue was saying, it's really important to look after your own mental health, because it's going to be constant, the amount of negative news there is out there, but we really should try and celebrate our own successes. And, things like TikTok, which I'm sure lots of young people are familiar with nowadays, maybe we can share some of these in class. And it's just quite nice for teachers to be able to foster that environment so that they can really encourage and celebrate some of the successes and experiences during lockdown, because I think it does normalize it and hopefully makes the young person and the adult feel a bit better during these mad times.
I also want to piggyback on the whole social, emotional health. I think it's also important to, like you said, do self checks about your mental well being. But also, I think it's important for teachers and students to get outside sometimes and just enjoy the world, enjoy nature. Even if it is a brief walk in the morning, before the day starts, I think it's very important to not lose track of the world, not to focus on the negative aspects of the world, of course, but just to really get outside because, the world is still a good place to be. So you definitely want to go outside and just kind of get your mind off of things a little bit. But I do agree. I think if they foster their creativity, if it is through a TikTok, if it's through a video, they have a lot of sources that you can get out that creativity and use it inside the classroom as well. Definitely keep touch with the outside world.
That's amazing. So, Sakiya, what do you think in terms of just some advice for students? But there's lots of challenges. What sort of advice would you give people about moving forward?
So I would say you need to sort of find an activity other than just school to kind of be focusing on. And again, that might be a bit difficult during this sort of pandemic time when you can't meet up with people in quite the same way, and clubs are going to be quite different, I imagine, in school. But it's also good to have these sorts of things on like your CV and when applying to universities. So one of the things that at Swap It Up we've created is something called creator briefs, which is a way for you to sort of be creative. There's so many different options. There's like from writing blogs to taking photos of things or even filming TikToks. And these are things that we are then going to be publishing as Swap It Up, and then crediting young people for giving sort of advice around environmental issues as well as around fashion and education. And it's something that I want to encourage people, especially in the UK, to get involved in, because we have actually partnered up with the DAV, the Duke of Edinburgh Award. So you can actually get points for your Duke of Edinburgh with Swap It Up. So that's a great way if you're trying to figure out a way to get your volunteering or your skill, then that is something that you can put towards that. And then also in terms of sort of environmentalism, a lot of what's kind of happening now is obviously social distancing and everything, and people don't want to be taking public transport as much as they did before. And I was quite a big advocate for public transport, but even I myself haven't used public transport really at all since lockdown. And so I would encourage people to cycle or walk where possible and try not to use the car if you can, but I understand that there are circumstances where that will be necessary. But I would very much encourage people to try cycling to get to places of a greater distance. And that's something that I'm definitely going to be doing more of and I've gotten really into during the lockdown.
So, Olivia, is there anything else you want to comment on?
I would just say keep your mask on and stay 6 feet away and think about other people and how your actions affect others. And if you feel uncomfortable in a situation, like if there's too many people, you can just leave. And that's probably the best choice, like just stay away. If you could just change one person to wear a mask, that's pretty great, I would say.
Well, that's really great. It's a lot of great advice coming from each of you ladies. And thank you so much. We've got creativity, just being more sort of natural about things and being concerned about the environment and just really taking the time to put things in perspective. I think the word that we talked about a lot during this call was balance, really having that balance. And thank you each so much, Sue, Carmen, Sakiya, Nikki, and Olivia, for joining us for this fantastic panel to discuss going back to school during the COVID-19 era and staying safe at school. Again, thank you so much, ladies. It's been a pleasure to speak with each of you. That is a wrap for UIO on staying safe at school during the COVID era. Great show with lots of insight from our wonderful panel, Sue Atkins, Carmen Lee, Nikki Gordon, Olivia Clark-Dixon, and Sakiya Ji. Thank you, girls, for listening, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to do the show. Today, I want to pray for all students and teachers, admin staff, and everyone who is returning to school during these uncertain times. My prayers are for safety for everyone, on and offline. I ask these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Tune in next week for the next episode of UIO for some straight talk on navigating the new normal with Susie Lavington. Meanwhile, hit me up on Twitter at Sonja Lewis, Instagram at Sonja D. Lewis, Facebook, sonjalewis.com/UIO-podcast. Tell me what you want to hear about and keep sending those questions on any of the episodes. Take care of you inside out, and remember, it is UIO.